Welcome to Authors Alcove. I am your host, Agnes Wolfe. Today I have contemporary fantasy romance author S.L. McMullen. She published Secret by Moonlight, the first of a four-part series. The second has come out, and the third and fourth will come out later this year. Today we are talking about the impact of others on our writing dreams, elements found in paranormal fantasy, and themes she wrote about in her book. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited.
Could you just share a little bit about yourself and what started you on your writing journey?
Sure. I am a very imaginative person. As a child, if I wasn't sleeping, I was pretending. Drove my family crazy, but I wasn't bored ever. And as I went through life, I just kind of like to imagine everything, but not necessarily write it down. But when I got older, I kind of started to do the writing classes at school and was excited about it. But found that it was not as easy for me. I kind of struggled in school with definitely with reading and writing. So I kind of left that. It wasn't until I was about 30 that I realized I did actually want to write. And so it was actually when I was at my parents' place in Montana, which I love. They have about 5 acres surrounded by mountains and pine trees everywhere. And I go up there every summer with my kids. And this one year, about 2012, I was there, and my dad likes to take me up on the mountains. And this particular ride just inspired me. These two characters I had been dreaming about, they just came to life in my mind, and I had to write about them. So I went back down to the bottom of the hill and said, Mom, I'm writing a book. And the rest was history. In about a year, I had over 400 pages. It developed from one book into four. And I actually just decided over Christmas break to add another book to that. So there'll be five.
One thing that you mentioned in your bio, which I found very interesting because I had somewhat of a similar experience, but you mentioned that in eighth grade, you actually had a creative writing and English teacher tell you that your writing was just not your thing. And I know that in my childhood, I was quite discouraged as well. I had some teachers say that I wasn't good at writing, which was funny because I had others say that I was excellent at writing. How did that
Mhm.
impact you? And when did you realize that this was something that you could actually do?
It greatly impacted me. It changed the way I thought about everything. It made me believe that if I wasn't good at something right away, then I wasn't worth the time and the effort to make me better. Back then, I saw a lot of the smart kids who would get recognition and praise for their automatically good grades and things. And for me, it was a struggle. And I didn't like how, because it was a struggle for me, I was pinned as a slacker or someone that didn't care about their life or about their schooling. I just found inspiration in my life to change my thought process. It made me a determined person, and I went about life saying there is not anyone out there that is not going to tell me what I'm capable of doing. If it is somebody, it's me, and I'm not going to stop myself. And it changed everything. And my parents, when I was a kid, said I was the most stubborn person they ever knew. So you add stubbornness and determinability, and there was nothing stopping me, even writing a book at how horrible I was at English and writing.
I think that's so important for people to realize that it's not really about how you start out as far as your talent. It's about how hard you're willing to work. And that's
Mhm.
like the difference between, they say the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, and
Mhm.
being really able to realize that, you with hard work can do whatever you want to do. So if you want to be a good writer, you don't have to be a good writer today.
Right. It took me
And
10 years to figure that out.
because like I hear from so many authors, they say their first book or not their first book, their first rough draft was crap.
Mhm.
And they
Mhm.
say everybody's first rough draft is crap. It's it's not about where you start, it's where you end up. And I think
Right.
that's what people don't realize.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what was the first book that you read that made you realize that this is something you wanted to do?
Well, it wasn't actually a book that I read. It was more about that inspiration that I got in Montana. When I was a kid, writing was and reading for sure was really, really hard for me. So I avoided it at all costs, unless it was mandatory at school. And even then, I don't know if I did my assignments. But after I finally learned how to love reading, the world was open to me. I addicted to libraries and books, and I can't go past one without getting all warm and fuzzy inside. So then that's when I started reading things. And one of the first books I stumbled upon was a book by David B. Coe. It's a fantasy book called The Children of Amarid. And it was my first example of what real fun can be when you read a book. And thank goodness he had several books in the process. So I just learned to read. It was more about the worlds that I was being open to that I had no idea. I wish I had known that as a kid. I would have read so much more, but unfortunately, you can't go back and change that. So,
So, without sharing any spoilers, could you just share the basic plot of your book, Secret by Moonlight?
yes, I like to describe it as heartache and directionless with trust issues meets tall, dark, and brooding with secrets. A kind of Pride and Prejudice adaptation with a Twilight twist. That's the best way I can describe it without getting anything away. But it's basically about a young woman in her 20s who she has heartache and she goes home to kind of recover and find out what direction her life will go. And her friend helps her. And along the way, she meets some characters that kind of flip her life upside down in a different way and kind of test her as a woman and her strength to overcome the trust issues she has and learning to open her heart up to love, especially when it's very difficult.
So, is your main character part of the fantasy world, or is she a normal human?
She's a normal human. Yep. And she gets kind of finds herself into that situation without knowing it and all the crazy that follows.
But this is a paranormal fantasy, so there are paranormal elements. Do you mind sharing some of those that you used as writing tools?
Yes. So in the book, right towards the very beginning, so this isn't giving anything away, she finds an old pendant that's buried up in the mountains far away, where she usually goes a lot. So it's a surprise to her to find it. And shortly after, she has a dream where this woman with a prominent Irish accent is determined to give her that same necklace that she found. And she does research and finds that the etchings on it kind of also relate to that Irish origin, but a lot of that gets is told more in book two. But there's strange things that happen because she has it, and that's kind of more of the paranormal part. Most of it happens in book two and on, but you have to say it in book one, or people don't know it. You don't want to confuse readers and just say it's a romance.
So, is there a reason why you were drawn to having that Irish part element in it, or is there you just chose it?
It was kind of one of those things where I love Ireland. I want to go there someday. But the way that the story went about, I mean, I wrote it chapter by chapter, not even knowing what the next chapter was going to be about. And it just kind of evolved. And the more I researched the paranormal elements of it, it just was like perfectly lined up. And I'm like, there's nothing else I would have used. So.
So, you said that you did some research. What kind of research did you do for the paranormal elements?
Well, I had to look at a lot of folklore and a lot of the regions and see what matched what I'd already come up with in my head. And that's where I say it lines up because you can have asked for a better situation where my mind and folklore matches. It's like, well, how do I know how that happens? But yeah, it was just lots of research in regions and things like that.
So, what is the part about paranormal activity or anything like that that intrigues you the most or inspires you to write?
I love the creatures, the cryptids. It's people, otherworldly people living among us, and we don't even know it, and how quickly it can go from we're blind to it affecting us. I mean, there's lots of folklore out there that talks about the interactions between people, and in my spare time, I watch paranormal shows, and so it's just natural that I want to add that to my story.
So, I have a question for you, a personal question. Is there a part of you that truly believes some of these paranormal things, or do you feel that it's all just fantasy?
Uh, um, I believe that there are. I watch shows that show me there is, and I trust that the shows that I'm watching, that the all the effort that goes into it, they're doing research to make sure that these videos are, as truthful as possible. So yes, I believe there are lots of things out there that we can't explain and that are hiding. So it's the imaginative part of me. I'm as a kid, fantasy was all I ever did. So of course I believe that still.
So my husband and it's kind of funny because I've always kind of had a belief more of the spirituals, which I think is the same as paranormal, just,
Uh-huh.
two
Mhm.
different words. And it's funny because the older my husband gets, the more he believes some of that stuff. Whereas I remember he used to be such a cynic and it's like the more and skeptic.
Uh-huh.
And now that he's experienced more of life, he's beginning to come on my side where he's like, well, maybe, and like, but we both definitely believe in like the spiritual aspect of life.
Yes.
But with fantasy, there is always at least a little bit of world building. How is the world your series set in different than the world that we live in?
It's kind of a split. Like I said, it's everyday people doing their everyday lives, and they find themselves in the middle of this supernatural, paranormal kind of atmosphere. And a lot of the world building happens in book two and on. So you see a lot more of that. But I'll just say, without spoiling anything, that eventually the characters have to travel somewhere. I'm sure you can guess where, but I won't say. To a realm where it's a lot of magical, mystical stuff, and have to solve this big life crisis that's happened that's detrimental.
So you made it very clear that you were a pantser. I don't know if you know the terms pantser and plotter, but you made it clear that you were a pantser for at least the first book. But do you now know that there's four in the series? Is it because you've now are starting to know that have kind of plotted it out from this point, or have you actually already started writing those books?
So what I do first, starting off, I said, okay, I want these two characters. I know this one scene. I need to have a backstory to get to the scene, and I need to have the ending, which I've planned out. I planned it out for the first one. Like I said, things have advanced. They just, as things come to me, I write them down. But when I originally sat down, I wrote a lot. I deleted like 4 or 5 chapters that were great for my mindset and getting into the characters' minds, but for the plot itself, for the book flow, it was not. But it helped me. So now, probably after 10 years of editing and things, I plan a little bit more. I put those sentences down of what I want to happen, but everything in between, it just happens as I'm writing, and I don't want to ever damper my creativity and put boundaries on myself. So
It makes a lot of sense. But as far as your character, how would you describe you said it's female, right?
yeah.
And if does it follow her throughout the whole series?
Yes, yes. It is basically her journey through self-discovery and reinventing herself after the heartbreak, and discovering empowerment and what she's capable of doing in spite of what other people think she could have done.
How would you describe her?
Oh, that's a good question.
What
She's
is her
kind of
name first? I didn't
Her name
catch.
is Shay, Shae, Shay.
Okay.
She's kind of down to earth, a little bit. She has a goofy friend that kind of brings out that side of her, but the beginning, she's just really struggling with life. But she enjoys nature, hikes. She has a dog, and she just kind of a little bit goes with the flow. But she's also open to what life brings to her, even though it's scary. Really down to earth. She's Montana girl, if you know what that is.
So you said that she has a best friend that brings out the goofy side. Does she actually take this journey with her best friend, or does she end
She
up
does.
going alone?
From the very
Oh,
beginning. Yep. You got the two best friends, and then you add a bunch of boys to it and go from there.
so is this a young adult fiction?
Shay is up 21, and so is her best friend. And then the ages range from a 16-year-old up to 24.
I
So
don't
it's
know if
kind of there. Sorry.
I I don't know if you've heard the term. They now are starting to call new adult. It's not an
Yeah.
official genre,
Mhm.
but
Yep.
yours kind of sounds like it's because it sounded a little bit like young adult, but then you didn't
Right.
classify that. So I have a feeling it would probably fall in that new adult.
Yeah. The library
genre.
put it in young adult section, but I kind of just hashtag all of it, because you just younger, older, all of them like it. I don't even know what to put on it. It's hard. I wish I hadn't done that, but it is what it is. That's how they have to be.
I probably would have counted it as a young adult, and I tend to go towards the young adult rather than the new adult, just because I'm more of a kid at heart, I guess.
Mhm.
But so what were some of the main themes that you found yourself drawn to throughout your series?
I definitely focus on Shay and the inner strength that she's learning to find in herself and the empowerment, personal growth, fighting for what one believes in. Those are definitely the strong aspects of this story because it is in first person and you are growing with Shay, the main character.
So which genre would you say is the strongest then in your book? Because you mentioned that it has both romance and fantasy and
Mhm.
paranormal elements. So which would you say is the strongest element?
For sure, romance, but there wouldn't be a romance without the paranormal fantasy aspect of it. It's hard to say what
Okay.
that is, but you can't have one without the other in this case, and so
All right. I did it because, like, I've heard that there's considered romancy and romantic fantasy. And
mhm.
apparently, I don't know which one. I think romancy is actually where the fantasy is more strong, whereas
Mm,
romantic
okay.
fantasy is, I could have them flipped, but I think I have it right. The romantic fantasy is when the romance is stronger. I don't know. But
Um,
anyway, what is one book that you could read over and over again?
and that would be Harry Potter. It was back in my 20s. I was working at a restaurant, and this librarian came into the restaurant. She had a book, and of course, I had to ask her what it was, and she told me about it. And back then, there were only two books out. And the next day, I went to the library, grabbed it, read it, and I've been hooked ever since. The way she wrote it was like she took all the imagination that I had as a kid and put it into a world. And the only way I could live there was to read it over and over again. And even now, where I just feel like all that excitement, I'll just go pick up the book and start reading again.
I actually was, I think I was 1920 when the first book came out. And so I would have been like, so we're probably the same age.
Uh-huh.
But because I started reading the first book right before the second book came out. And then I read the second book and I just was in love. And up until that point, I had only been writing like uh realistic fiction. And that was what sparked that is
Mhm.
the reason why I'm a fantasy writer now.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyway, you also said that you co-wrote a children's book with a friend. I am a mom of an adopted daughter who was adopted at the age of 6. She moved in with me when she was 5. I met her when she was 4. So adoption's really big to
Oh
my
yeah.
heart. Could you just share about the book and why you decided to join forces with your friend and write this particular book? Also share the name of the book as well, of
Oh,
course.
okay. Yep. The book is called When My World Changed, and it's by Kaylin Maurer. She illustrated all of the pages and knew what the story she wanted to tell, but she didn't feel comfortable writing it herself. And she knew that I was a writer, so she asked me to help her, and we just kind of went through all of it and wrote it. And I'm just really thankful that I was able to help her with this. But it's crazy how it has evolved into what it is today. She uses the proceeds from each book sale to help families to adopt children. But she originally wrote it just for her parents to celebrate her anniversary of being adopted, and it just evolved from there. And she's going for it. It was. I'm really thankful that I was part of it because helping her helped me to publish my books. I did them in the same year that I helped her. So
That's so awesome. I know my daughter, with her adoption, I think they all adoptive kids probably go through this, but she has had kind of a journey of, you know, not full self-acceptance of the adoption into
mm.
now like, you know what, I'm an adopted kid. This is who I am. And she's totally embraced it. And I think that that's kind of, so I think it's kind of neat that an adoptive child wrote this particular book, or at least
She talks
co-wrote.
about all of the firsts that she encountered. She was adopted from Russia at 8 years old. So to see McDonald's was, what is this? To see buildings of all these kinds, it was all just new to her. And so she writes about that, and you can really see the experience in the eyes of someone that is adopted, and kind of helps parents be aware of how much of a change it can be for a child. So it's
Yeah.
nice.
I think that that's also important for parents to realize that, like it's not necessarily always a 100% positive thing
Mhm.
for the adopted child. Like because, they're losing something. They're gaining a lot, but they're also losing a lot. And I think that sometimes, especially adoptive parents, when they're first adopting, they don't realize that until that child has come into their home, and then they
Mhm.
start to realize, oh, this child had to give up a lot, especially when it's an older child like my daughter and your friend.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
anyway,
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, no, no, you're good. You're good. So
I was just gonna say she talks about, never being hugged before, which is an interesting thing that you just don't realize that that can be a thing, and, yeah, so it really is nice.
and that, even that, like, for her, she's never was hugged again, but even for like a foster kid, just a different type of hugging might happen. And like
Mhm.
just those little tiny differences, that they're so foreign to them, and they have to learn this whole new culture, even if it seems like it's the same culture. There's like, I think the example was given to us when we first started our foster care license, because I did that for 7 years, is they wanted us to describe how we made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and how everybody made this peanut butter and jelly sandwich differently.
Uh-huh.
And just like something so small, but to a child, they're going to watch that and they're going to be like, oh, you know, and there's just little things like
Yeah.
that. And I
Mhm.
think that that's so important. And that's why I thought it was so great that your friend wrote it from her perspective, because I think we as parents especially need to hear more of that perspective.
Yep.
But anyway, enough about that. But I just wanted to also just thank you for being on the show. Um, well, first of all, I forgot to ask you, did you self-publish or did you try traditional publishing?
I self-published. That
How was
was
that? How was that experience for you?
Helping Kaylin do her book. It was less scary than it would have been if I had done it on my own, but, there was a lot of research and reading on just what to do, and the frustrating part was once I did publish, I found out things I should have done before, so it's an ongoing process, but as each book moves on, I'm better and better at it. But I enjoy it. I do all my own marketing and all of that stuff, which is still a learning experience. Um, but I like it. I had heard so much about the trying to traditional publish and all of the letters you send out. And I did have one person, a friend of mine, she approached me. She has a small publishing company, and it ended up not being kind of what she publishes, which is fine. But after that, I just really solidified. I'll just self publish and get the word out, and then hopefully it'll fly.
What are some marketing things that you've done that you've found success with?
I do Amazon ad campaigns, and I took this online free class that helped me really know exactly how I should be doing it. And in the last 4 months, I have really seen an incline in um, sales and just visibility. People are seeing it now. And then I also do Facebook promoting on lot. I've joined lots of different author pages and ARC read pages and or profiles, and um, I just kind of go with that. And I have an Instagram account and a TikTok, which I don't know if the TikTok goes anywhere. It's hard. It's like just look at what my book is. I'm telling you what it is. You don't want to have to hear from me. Just look at that, and that'll be enough.
I have I have every social media account I think I can think of, and I've tried TikTok and I actually have a lot of fun with it, but like I've kind of shelved it. I'm not using that anymore. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you again for being on my show, but I do want to ask the question I ask everybody. And what is one piece of advice you would give to a not yet published author?
um, edit. I took 10 years and I don't know how many times I rewrote and rewrote. That's the only way I could find my voice. And once I found it, it flowed, but it was a hard uphill climb. You have to read. I even put it aside for couple of months so that when I read it again, it was fresh and new. And sometimes I was surprised, oh, I wrote that. That's amazing. Other times it was I could see things that I had reviewed so many times before that now I could see that they were a problem or needed to be fixed. So definitely you can't just write it through and say, okay, it's great. Send it to the editor or whatever. You have to rewrite.
I remember hearing, I wish I could say the quote like it said, but it said that, you know, definitely write the story that you want to read, because you're going to have to read it
Mhm.
7,000 times. That's true. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much for being on my show, Stephanie.
Me
I,
too.
I also just want to thank my listeners. You can find